A single act of courage is often the tipping point for something extraordinary. A single act of courage is often the tipping point for something extraordinary. Now, you and I know this to be true because when we study God's Word, we love the stories where a person, through a single act of courage, changes everything. Because they step up and they simply believe what God has said when others around them do not believe, but they step up and they believe, and literally everything among their circumstance changes. We love stories like that. Those are the stories that we tell our children. Those are the stories that we build the flannel board and we show the children in Vacation Bible School. All those moments. Those are the moments that we love more than any other. I mean, don't we love the story when Moses is the one who goes into Pharaoh and says, "Let my people," what? Oh, don't you love that story? He probably stuck his finger in the face of the most powerful man in the world and said, "God is bigger than you." We love those stories, don't we? Or the story maybe even of Daniel. Remember, he's threatened that if he continues to pray, that the big bad guy who's in charge of the government's going to throw him where? Lion's den. And Daniel knows what's coming, but he still believes in God, and he still continues to pray to him, and he gets thrown down in the den of lions, and the next morning he didn't even get licked by those lions. We love that story, don't we? Or maybe the story of Gideon. Isn't this the greatest of stories? Gideon's going into this battle, and he's going to have to attack about 135,000 Midianites, and he has a troops of 22,000, and he's a little nervous about that, whether it's going to be enough troops or not, and God says that is far too many troops. Do you remember the story of Gideon? Until not just 22,000 attacking 135,000, but eventually it goes down to what? You remember the number? 300. Against 135,000. Can you imagine being Gideon? You have 22,000, you don't think that's enough, and God says, okay, now you have enough. You have 300. We love those moments, right? Or the story of Esther. I mean, that's a great one for ladies. Maybe they can't identify with, Moses or Daniel or David or hacking the head off Goliath. Maybe that's a little too masculine. And so we love the story of Esther, right, ladies? I mean, the story of going into the king, that if she appears before the king without his permission, that she could be killed, but she feels the pressure, she feels the weight of all of her people who are under the death threat. In fact, they're all going to die. The entire Jewish population is going to die because of what Haman has done, and Mordecai has this conversation with her, and she is brave, and she says, it may just be, Mordecai says, it may just be for a moment like this that you are in the position that you're in. And so she goes in, and the king loves her, and it all ends wonderful. We love those stories when it ends wonderful, don't we? And then probably our favorite of all of those is probably that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego dudes. You remember that story? They're going to be in trouble, and they're going to be thrown in the fiery furnace. And they say that great speech to the king, "Let it be known to you, O king, we will not bow." We love stories like that. We love stories where in that single act of courage, the whole circumstance changes. We love to tell those stories. We love to remember those stories. But for some reason in our daily lives, those stories seem light years away from our existence, don't they? Don't those moments of courage, those moments when God shows up and changes all the circumstances and wipes out the bad guys or brings in the good guys, doesn't it seem like those moments are so far away? Well, the truth is we're probably never going to go stick our finger in the hand of a Pharaoh and tell him that he's supposed to do such and so. And we may never get to go into a fiery furnace and stay cool in the furnace, for those of you who grew up in the 70s and 80s with that children's musical. But every day, and in fact far more times than you and I would expect, we are called to stand and have courage. And what I want to do this morning is something a little bit different than what I normally do. I want to try to help you identify some moments in your life where the exact same things are at play. The same circumstances are there. Yeah, you may not be killed in that kind of sense, but that moment of whether or not you will believe, those happen in our life time and time and time again. Because these Bible stories that I've mentioned and you know and have studied are not just to inspire us. They're not just simply to tell the redemptive story of God to the Jewish people. They are also to teach us how you and I are to live in, if not identical circumstances, similar circumstances. And so while you may never face down lions, you may face down something more scary, more difficult, more powerful than those forces. And I want to help you this morning try to identify some of those things in your life. And then secondly, what I want to do is I want to call you and teach you how that you can find bravery in the middle of those circumstances. So what I want to try to do is to identify in your life moments where if you would have a single act of courage and you will stand up when everybody else is sitting, or you will be obedient to God, that the circumstances may change. I want to try to help you identify those kind of moments in your life, because we have them far more often than what we really believe or really can even recognize. And then when we come to those moments, rather than seeking safety, I want to show you and encourage you instead to seek bravery and try to communicate how you can do that. All right? You understand where we're going this morning? A little bit different, not going to be necessarily verse-by-verse exposition, but we're going to try to put some of these things that are larger in perspective into our individual lives for every day. All right, so how can we identify then some of the moments where we face an opportunity to have that single act of courage? Well, here's what I want you to think about. If you know that you are to do something, you feel like God has told you to do this, or that God is leading you to do this, and it's a moment where you're supposed to step forward, but you, by doing that thing, whatever it is, maybe that's going to the principal and telling him something that's happening, or maybe it's some kind of financial thing, or maybe God's calling you to do something outside of your comfort zone. Whatever those things are, if you know that God is calling you to step out and do that, but there is a potential for trouble, struggle, hurt feelings, or loss, or you are scared, then that is your moment. Now let me kind of unpack that. Have you ever been to a place in your life where you know you're supposed to do something? You know it. Maybe it's not written down, but it's something louder. Not that God has spoken to you audibly, it's something stronger than that. And you know that this door or whatever thing is, you're supposed to do this, but you know if you do this, it's going to possibly turn out bad because someone's going to get their feelings hurt, or it's going to be a radical lifestyle change for you, or there's something different going to have to happen. And you stand there and you go, I know that God wants me to do this, but all these other things might happen, or it's going to mean this or that. Have you ever been there? Anybody raise your hand? Have you been there any time in your life? All right, you've been there, haven't you? I have been there multiple times in my life, and it seems like many paths in my life lead me back to that place over and over and over again. Well, if you ever get to that moment where you're a little scared, you know you're supposed to do it, but you don't want to because it's going to mean a change, it's going to mean hurt feelings, it's going to mean struggle, it's going to mean trouble, then you are in the same moment that Moses was in when he's trying to stand before Pharaoh. You're in that exact same moment when Gideon does the arithmetic. And he's counting a lot more of them than me. And if you know you're supposed to do those things, and yet you are scared, you are concerned about that, that is a biblical moment where how you respond to that is going to determine how people think and talk and believe about you in years and years to come. Is there anybody that's going through that this morning? Be bold. I'm not going to come to your house. I'm not going to come knock on your door. Okay, we have one person who says that's where they are in life. Okay, well, there we go. 2, 3. Too late. I gave you a chance, and you didn't raise your hand. So I've got one, all right? If you are not here right now, you will be here at some moment. And whether or not you take courage and have courage in that moment is going to determine how your children possibly think about you, how your grandchildren talk about you, and they will either talk about the moment when you knew that you were to do this, and either you did that and it changed the circumstance, or you wimped out and you didn't Yes, we don't face lions necessarily, and yes, we don't face Pharaoh, but we face something just as scary when we look at that moment and we see God wants us, God's calling us, we should do this, we should step out in faith, but if we do this, it might not go well, there could be problems, people may not like me anymore, and we stand there and go, I'm not sure. All right? So that's one circumstance in your life where you're going to face very similar circumstances, just like all of our great heroes did. Now here's the other moment when you do that. The other moment that happens is if you don't know what to do. But there's a potential for trouble, struggle, hurt, feelings, loss, or you are scared. There are some times in our life where we just come to a moment and we go, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I really haven't heard a word from the Lord. I don't know what we're supposed to do, and I've got to decide, am I going to go over here and do this, or am I going to go over here and do this, and I'm scared and I'm concerned because I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what tomorrow brings. If you're in that moment, you are also at a biblical moment where courage is needed. Now, is there anybody that would admit that they're there today? Anybody raise your hand? You just don't know what to do? Okay, good. You're going, Lord, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't know if I'm supposed to go right or left, forwards or backwards. I'm just standing here, but I am in this moment where I know I've got to do something and I can't be sure. See, I'm one of those people who wants the guarantees. In fact, every time I go to the store and they say, hey, would you like to buy the extended warranty? I struggle because I go, do I need the extra or should I not? Because I know in my mind that they have figured it out. That the odds are that I am not going to need the warranty at this price, lest they wouldn't sell it to me, right? I always love doing that to a car dealer, the time that I'm buying a car, and the car dealer would get that last moment. You know, they've already gotten all my money, and then they're trying to get some more of my money. And they say, don't you want the extended warranty and have that peace of mind and that safety? And I'm like, yes. I want that, yes. Can I have that? But then I know that they have spent millions of dollars researching what every car is going to cost them on average, and then they raise the price on that and they sell it to me. So I put my hands on the desk and I hold them until they turn white, and I say, no, I'm going to trust your research. And your research says that you're not going to spend that much money on the average car, so I believe you, and I'm not going to take that. But how many of us, if we could get a guarantee, a warranty on life, we would pay whatever it took to do that because we are scared because we don't know what's going to happen. In fact, that's kind of the formula for this. The formula for this is anytime that you have a decision that must be made or action to be taken and you add to that an unknown outcome, that equals a moment for courage, doesn't it? Little formula. Anytime that there's an action to be taken, a decision to be made, and I add that to I don't know what's going to happen, and we need just as much courage in our own life, even though there's no Midianites, even though there's no lions, even though there's no Pharaoh, even though there's no Goliath there, we need just as much courage as these biblical characters had in that moment because we forget that they did not know the outcome. At a conference this week, and the conference was kind of led by a guy by the name of Andy Stanley. And you may not know Andy, but you know his dad, Charles Stanley. And Andy was telling the story that when Charles Stanley was early in his ministry, he was an associate pastor at the great First Baptist Church Atlanta. And the lovely people at First Baptist Church Atlanta had run the pastor off, and they had asked Charles to be the pastor as an interim basis as the associate pastor while they found another pastor. And so Charles, as a very young man, said, yes, I will do that. And when he took over that church, it began to grow. It began to grow phenomenally. And the people who were concerned about the previous pastor then became concerned about the new associate pastor who's becoming the pastor, so they did everything they could to run him off. In fact, at one moment, Andy Stanley tells a story during a meeting of some type. There was a man who made an announcement, and he used a four-letter word that we would not use in our church during that announcement. And so Charles, as a young man, comes, stands beside the wonderful man who's making those announcements and says to, hey, brother, we just don't talk like that, and we're not going to have that. And the guy says, if you don't back off, I'm going to punch you in the face. And Charles said, we really can't talk like that. And the guy punched Charles Stanley in the face. in a business meeting in front of everybody else, or some kind of meeting. And Andy said, it would have been so easy for my dad, Charles, to leave that situation. By the way, if you want to get rid of me, just punch me in the face up here and I'm out, okay? I'm not that strong. I'm not that bold. I feel like Nolan Richardson sometimes. You know how you have pay me 5 years of my contract. I'm good. You know, let me go ahead and pay that in advance. I'm fine. I'll walk away. You're not going to have to do that much to get rid of me. But Andy's talking about how his dad, and everybody encouraged his dad to leave. You shouldn't stay here. It's all so messed up. It's difficult. You shouldn't be here. And he kept hearing from his father, yes, I know all of that is true, but God whispers to me that I should stay. And he stays. Now, wouldn't it have been so much easier for God to say, hey, Chuck, listen, you hang in there, and I'm going to make you a very powerful person within our country. Okay? If you just hang in there, you're going to have this incredible worldwide ministry. You're going to sell all these DVDs, all these CDs. You're going to have a national exposure on the television. Your message is going to go across shortwave radio all across the world. All you got to do is hang in there. What would Charles say? He would say, I'm in, right? He would say, I'm staying. No big deal. I can handle all the rest of this stuff. And for many of us, that's what we want God to whisper to us. But God never does that, does he? He never says, hey, if you hang in there, it's going to be great. He never says, hey, if you just get through this, it's going to be wonderful. He never says to us, hey, look, if you do this, these are the things that I'm exactly going to do. Although he did that with Abraham, and Abraham still didn't get it, did he? So even in the times that God does say it specifically, we still don't get it. Why? Because we need courage. We need courage. And yes, we may not face a Pharaoh, but we may face a decision that is just as difficult and just as scary and just as important for us, because there are times in our life where decisions have to be made, actions have to be taken, and we do not know the outcome, and we need courage. See, it happens to us a lot more than what we realize, doesn't it? Sometimes they're big moments, sometimes they're just little tiny moments. But over and over again, we come to points in our life, even though we know God, even though we believe God, we've done all this kind of stuff, where we are scared because we are afraid of what might happen or what might not happen. And so we stand around, at least I do, and we go, woe is me, what's going to happen? Because over and over in our life, we have a decision to make, and that decision is whether we will seek safety or whether we will seek bravery. Whether we will be brave in the moment and step forward and do what we know God has called us to do, or to continue forward, at least following God at the last moment that we could follow his tracks. And we've got a decision whether we will continue and step out there and be brave, or whether we will retreat into safety. And far too many times as Christians, you know what we're choosing? We choose safety far, far, far too often. We don't want to get involved. We don't want to get our hands dirty. We don't want to get into that kind of situation. So we're going to play it safe. A great story that I picked up, a book called Just Courage, because I need courage. I'm the lion. You know, remember the lion from the Wizard of Oz? He doesn't have courage. That's who I am. And so I have to constantly seek out courage, because I don't have any courage. And so I picked up this book by a guy named Gary Hagen. And if you don't know what he's done, he started International Justice Mission. And so he's doing incredible things around the world in the area of human trafficking. And he's making a huge difference in the world, in scary, scary places. But he tells this story, what I want to tell you this morning, and the story is this, that one of the biggest regrets of life, I think he writes, is a sense of having gone on the trip but missing the adventure. He tells the story of his father and how his father would always take the sons, and the sons would always go hiking deep into the middle of nowhere, and they would always have these great adventures. And he tells the story of one particular day that his dad is going to Mount Rainier. Have you been to Mount Rainier? Anybody hiked Mount Rainier? Anybody like that? Mount Rainier is like one of the practice hills, if you want to, not really a hill, but kind of a practice mountain if you're going to go to climb Mount Everest, 14,410 feet. And so he goes on this day, and it's a day that when Gary is 10 years old, he's not really interested in hiking deep into the mountains and up to the hills. And in fact, he writes in the book that he goes this moment, and there's a lawyer who's had to write a sign there that says, hey, people die if you go up here. You know, been to those kind of signs, maybe at the amusement park or something, and there's like 75,000 things that happen wrong to you if you go on this ride, and so you're like, maybe I don't want to go on this ride. Well, that's kind of the way that it is, and this 10-year-old boy is reading the sign about all the dangers and how many people have died, and there's bears, and there's tigers, and all that stuff, oh my. And so you're not going to go that forward, and so he says to his dad, no, Dad, that looks boring. You know how we are as 10-year-olds, right? You know, that's boring. We don't want to do that. He said, instead, I'd like to hang out at the visitors center. And he writes, indeed, the Paradise Meadow had a huge and magnificent visitor center with exhibits and video displays about the wildlife, the history of the mountain, the drama of those who had tried to climb it, and even a wildflower quiz for kids that I was sure that I could win. And Dad tried a few more times to woo me up the mountain and explain that it would be a long day by myself at the visitor center. Now, don't think about leaving your 10-year-old boy at the visitor center. That's a whole other part of the story. Don't ignore that. But eventually he relented. My father did. And so I scurried down to the visitor center and was quite pleased with myself while they headed up the mountain. Listen to what he writes. The visitor center was warm and comfortable, with lots of interesting things to watch and to read. I devoured the information and I explored every corner, and judging by the crowd, it was clearly the place to be. As the afternoon stretched on, however, the massive visitor center started to feel awfully small. The warm air felt stuffy, and the stuffed wild animals started to seem, well, just dead. The inspiring loop videos about extraordinary people who climbed the mountain weren't as interesting the 6th or 7th time through, and they made me wish that I could be one of those actually climbing the mountain instead of reading about it. I felt bored, sleepy, and small, and I missed my dad. I was totally stuck, totally safe, but totally stuck. After the longest afternoon of my 10-year-old life, Dad and my brothers returned, flushed with their triumph. Their faces were red from the cold and their eyes clear with delight. They were wet from the snow, famished, dehydrated, and nursing scrapes from the rocks and the ice. But on the long drive home, they had something else. They had stories and an unforgettable day with their dad on a great mountain. I, of course, revealed nothing, insisting that it was my favorite day of the whole vacation. But the truth be told, I went on the trip and I missed the adventure. And 34 years later, I still remember the day at the Visitors Center. You see, in our Christian walk, we say we believe a lot of things. Savior, you can move the mountain. We sing that song. We sing other songs about how great and glorious He is and God can change all these things. But the only way that we're going to see them is if we ask God to help us be brave rather than retreat into safety. Why in Gary's life on that particular day as a 10-year-old, why did safety win over bravery? Well, a couple of reasons. He looked at the two wrong things, the things that you shouldn't look at. Number one, you should never look at the circumstances, because the circumstances are scary. There's a good reason that you're scared. That is a natural thing God has put in you, that if you see bears, you should run. At least faster than the person with you, you should run. There are things that we should be afraid of. Snakes. You should be afraid of snakes. There's no good reason for... You should be afraid. There are certain things you should be afraid of, but there are moments that you have to overcome the circumstances because you know, yes, this is not safe, but I will be okay in the middle of this. And see, that is what he missed. He looked at the circumstance. He, as a 10-year-old boy, looked at the mountain, and he saw how big that it was. He read the attorney's discussion of how bad it is over there. He looked at all the circumstances. And then he looked at himself. He looked at himself. He put the mirror up and said, I'm just a 10-year-old little boy. I can't do anything. But the one thing he did not look at, and the one place that bravery comes, the one thing that he missed, he didn't look at his father. He looked at himself and saw his weakness. He looked at the mountain and saw the circumstances, but he did not look at his dad. Because his dad was the one that was going to get him through. The dad is the one who always has gotten the sons through. This is what he always did. There was a consistent history and pattern, but he did not trust that. And so what I want to leave us with this morning is just a look at our Father. You've got your Bibles, and turn it with me to Isaiah chapter 6, because Isaiah chapter 6 gives us a glimpse at God. And if we want bravery when we're called to do something and to live a life of following Christ in this messed up world, which does not reward that, in fact, it does not like it, in fact, it attacks it, and we're going to be attacked because we do these things, and God calls us to be beyond who we are and to be a child and follow Him rather than trying to be an adult in control. And the only way that we're going to have bravery is not looking at the circumstances and not looking at us. The only way that we will ever have bravery if we look at Him. You know the setting very well. Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah is concerned. The whole nation is concerned because the king has died. And even though the king messed up toward the end of his life, the king had essentially been a good king. In the listing of good kings and bad kings, he was on the good category. In fact, he had ruled and reigned for over 50 years. Can you imagine having the same president for 50 years? That was the person that they knew. He was the one who brought peace and comfort to the country, to the nation. And now, 50 years afterwards, he is in the middle of the struggle, and finally he dies, and Isaiah is concerned. And so in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the real king. The little king had died, the little king that seemed really, really big. But the big king was alive, and I saw the Lord sitting on a throne high and lifted up. I've talked about this passage on previous occasions. He is talking about this throne that is only for God to sit on. It is not a place that anybody can sit. And in that room, the train of his robe filled the temple. I know that as we had the royal wedding a couple of weeks ago, and we all remember Princess Diana, the train of her robe, and how big it was. Well, here is a massive place, and the train of the robe of our king has filled it to such a place that that train went up and down every aisle in that room. It went to the left and to the right, and there was no place